like some meetings. All right? I need to respond to the adult meeting. Please give us a good welcome.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about particularly as it pertains to how you understand what's going on in your world. And I have to say just a little bit about myself. I spent 25 years as a broadcast journalist and loved news and information ever since I was a kid, so it was a pretty obvious career choice for me. I still love to talk about it. I'll talk about it at parties. It's possibly why a lot of people don't want to talk to me at parties, because it's not necessarily what they want to talk about. But I find it an endlessly fascinating situation, and I find it especially endlessly fascinating in the era that we live in right now. I remember having a conversation with my grandfather many years ago, and I was born in 1910, and I was marveling about all the changes that happened over the course of his lifetime. When he was born, automobiles were barely a thing. Flight was still experimental. Women did not have the right to vote. Before his 60th birthday, there was again travel, civil rights movement, big changes in society, and landing men on the moon. It's a pretty incredible to think about. And I used to say to them, I'll never see that kind of change. I was completely wrong. It happened in the very area that I was most interested in, which was media. And the big changes have happened since the arrival of the internet. It essentially changed all the rules. Does it make things better for us? Just again, to give you a little perspective on where my world was when I was in college. A lot of what I experienced as talking in college is very similar. We had the same governor you have, as a matter of fact. But a lot was different, particularly in the world of media. These were my daily news choices in college. Television set and newspapers. Okay? And if you notice the little inset there on the far end of the screen, the dial, there are 13 numbers on there. If you were lucky enough to live in a major metropolitan area, most of those numbers would be filled with something. If you grew up in a small town like me, 4 or 5 tops. Okay, so that was the choices you had when I was in college. And compare that now to your world. You have an endless number of television viewing choices. You can access any place in the world through the internet, and you can literally have the world at your fingertips with your phones. So you would think that because of that, this would make you a more information-based society, more knowledge about what's going on, because you have access to so much. So let's find out, just take a short Newsmaker Quiz. What I want you to do now, I'm just going to show you some images, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hands if you recognize the people on screen. And just to make sure everybody gets at least one right, we'll start with this. Okay, if you know who this person is, raise your hand high. I'm looking to see if anybody did raise their hand. Fortunately, I'm not seeing that. Okay, good. That was the easy one. Now, let's see how we do on this next one. Can you name both of these women and as well as each one's job title? Raise your hand high if you can. Okay, a lot fewer hands. Somebody raise your hand. You want to tell me?
They're the senators of California.
Correct.
Diane.
That is correct. Both are. Yeah, give her a round of applause. Leave the crowd. Raise your hands on that one. Yes. Senators Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, the two senators representing your state of California in Washington. So I'm pretty confident most of you will not get this next one then. Can anybody raise your hand and tell me who this is? Raise your hand if you know. Our faculty knows it. I will give you a little bit of break on this one too, because you're new to this area, many of you, so you wouldn't necessarily have to know this until now. But if you happen to vote in Rohnert Park this past November, then this would have been the gentleman whose name was, one of the gentlemen whose name was on the ballot for Congress. He is the U.S. representative for Rohnert Park and other areas in the North Bay. Congressman Mike Thompson. Okay, so let's move it globally now for a few questions, see how we do there. If you know who this is, raise your hand high. Okay, not seeing any hands. He's even perplexed. It's a food knows. All right, that is the Prime Minister of Great Britain. All right. Next slide. Who can identify this gentleman? Okay, not seeing any hands. All right. He is the President of Venezuela. All right, and our final of our World Leaders quiz, this gentleman. Who can identify him? I'm looking at a particular section for this one. Yes, he is your man in Margaret's section. That is the President of Iran. Okay. Well, okay, so we haven't had too great a success with the last few ones, so let's try a few more and see how you do. Who can identify this next person? Raise your hand. All right. Now we've got a majority vote going. How about this individual? And finally, this individual. So, are we spotting a pattern here at all? We certainly know a lot about our entertainers, but people who directly have no impact on our lives whatsoever. But the leaders who I showed you previous to that, every single one of them has the potential to directly impact your lives. But most of us don't know who they are. So that poses an interesting question. In a world that's more connected by media technology than at any time in human history, why is our understanding of global issues no greater, and some would argue actually less than it was before? Anybody have any theories on that? Yeah?
We have other things to think about.
Meaning what?
We have access to other things.
Mm-hmm. Lots of choices, right? Anybody else have an answer either similar to that or maybe a different perspective? Anybody else have anything? Yeah?
We have access to everything that you said, but what's in our face and what's like in the news is Miley.
Yeah.
Our audience, not the leaders. I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
It's not in the big one.
Yeah, you can definitely make that argument. In fact, using Miley Cyrus as an example, of course, she gained some notoriety last year with her infamous twerking incident at the VMAs. But I think a lot of us would have not been aware of it until something else happened, which was the news media covered it endlessly for weeks on end after it happened. So if you missed the VMAs, you've got plenty of chances to see Miley twerk in the weeks that followed. Okay, so certainly you can place a bit of finger of blame on the media. People have been doing that for decades and centuries, and it's no different now. So let's look at just a handful of the issues in terms of the news media itself that could be problems. All right, first of all, approximately 90% of the world's media is owned by 5 or 6 conglomerates. The world's media, not the United States media, the world's. Okay? Think about that for a second. What does that mean? What does that mean to you when you hear that much of the world's media is owned by that few of entities? Yeah?
It could be fairly biased towards the people who own these companies and what their beliefs are.
That could happen. We certainly have seen that in media. Bias is certainly an issue. And that is particularly a problem that when you have fewer voices, that's less diversity of opinion. So if somebody does decide to present bias, where's the counterbalance? Where is that going to come from? Okay, what else, when you think about the size of some of these companies, let's use an example, for instance. The Disney Corporation, one of the biggest conglomerates there is. Does anybody know what some of the Disney's holdings, some of the things that Disney owns? Anybody know that? Yeah.
Is it
ABC News. Yeah, ABC Network and ABC News. Now, if you are a huge corporation like Disney, do you think when they have board meetings to discuss things that they have big, deep discussions on, what's the current credibility level of ABC News? Do you think that's a huge topic of concern? Only if it's going to affect the bottom line. Then it's a topic of concern. But they're answering to shareholders, they're answering to a whole myriad of economic interest. And so money trumps everything. Corporate profits take precedent over public service. I've experienced that myself as a former news professional, owned by both individual ownership and by corporate ownership. And the problem that we face sometimes had little to do with a corporate owner trying to impose, that is, a point of view on us. It had more to do with them not really being plugged in to the public service we were providing. Our local owners always were, because they were out in the community. They heard from people if we were doing a good job or if we were doing a bad job. Our last owner was based in San Antonio, Texas, and they never heard about us at all except when it was time to look at the books for the year. That's really the only contact they had with us. Okay, so another problem is cultural imperialism. I know that this has been talked about a lot in sections. When you have that little diversity in media ownership around the world, and it's coming from sources that are so powerful and so rich and so influential, certainly that is going to impose a certain amount of Western and industrialized culture on all other nations. Another problem is news bureaus. They tend to favor industrialized nations. If you look to see where major news networks have their bureaus, they tend to have most of them either in big cities in the U.S. or big European cities. Now, or places such as the Middle East that are constant trouble spots. Not so much in places like Africa. There are some hopeful things that have to do with new media technology in that regard, in the sense that you have a situation where technology is so affordable now and so easy to get to people that they can now hire people kind of on standby in certain regions of the world. So if there is an issue there, they can call them up and put them to work immediately, which would not have been possible in the past. But another problem we have now in terms of dissemination of news and information is hyper-competitive climate. There's a hyper-competitive climate that has led to more sensationalism and more what's called infotainment. A couple of your comments earlier kind of addressed that fact. Why do you think news is so concerned in this day and age with stories like Miley Cyrus? Why do you think they seem to take a particular interest in recent years, more so maybe than in the past? Definitely more so than when I was your age. Why do you think that's happening? Any theories?
It's cheaper.
It's
expensive to cover that kind of growth.
Well, that's true too, and with programming in general, certainly cost is a huge factor, because that's why you see less and less news shows. News is very expensive to produce as opposed to syndicated programming. But within news itself, yeah.
Because it's easier to cover sensational stuff. You don't have to go as in depth because it's not.
Yeah, and let's go back to our news quiz that we took a few minutes ago too. Okay, which answers did you get right, and which ones did you get wrong? All the celebrities, everybody knew them. Nobody knew the world leaders, or very few knew the world leaders. Okay, this is where a little bit of our own responsibility comes into the mix too. If one of the local broadcasts, for instance, decides we're going to do a half-hour looking at the issue of global hunger, you don't want to miss this. They promo this program. They try to get you involved to watch this. If you see a promo for that, a special news report on global hunger, how many of you are going to tune that in tonight? Yeah, your faculty. is going to tune it in. Not many of you are going to, though. But suppose they have something that they promo, the latest scandal. Guess what Kanye West said now? How many of you might consider watching to find out what Kanye West said now? A few more? Yeah, maybe Kanye's not a good example, but you're going to be interested. You're going to be more interested, and the ratings back that up. Now, should news be that worried about ratings? Well, they always have been, and particularly in broadcast, and certainly in newspaper circulation. But if you remember that old television set I showed you a few minutes ago, they had a pretty captive audience in those days. If I turned on the television set at 6 o'clock in the evening when I was a kid, I had a choice of watching news, or maybe news. Those were my choices. You have a lot more choices. I always give the example of my 13-year-old son who is a known sugar addict. If you provide 2 buffets and one of them is the most nutritious, expertly prepared food on the planet, and the next one is just all chocolate, I know which one he's going for. He's going for the chocolate. And that's kind of human nature, to want to be entertained, to want to have fun and to have pleasure. So certainly a topic like a global hunger would not fit that criteria. So that's an issue right now. Why is it more of an issue now? Because of what I just talked about, the fact that you have a gazillion choices of what to watch, what to listen to, what to do. If I'm going to entice you to watch 30 minutes of my news broadcast, maybe I need to put something in there that might attract your demographic. I have a colleague that I used to work with who now works at NBC 11. And I've had him talk to classes. He's one of the most ethical people I know in the business. But he will admit it's getting harder and harder to make the true ethical, this is the best news story we could be running decisions, because there's so much pressure to have good ratings, because as opposed to just putting money in your coffers, now it's a matter of survival. Think about how many newspapers are struggling now just to stay in business. So that changes the dynamic of things. Again, money, a big issue. Because money's a big issue, that also has shrunk the staff size at news media outlets. They're shrinking rapidly. I've been in Sonoma County since the mid-'80s, and I have quite a few friends over the Press Democrat, and know for a fact that since I moved here, the entire staff of the Press Democrat is probably slightly over half of what it was when I moved here. In those days, it was a huge regional newspaper with bureaus up and down the North Coast, all the way into Humboldt County. Now they've had to pull back considerably on their beats, on their bureaus, and they've essentially become more of a Sonoma County newspaper just because of necessity. And it also leads to the next problem that I put on this list with today's media, which is what I would call hit-and-run reporting. Those of you who follow global news at all know what I'm talking about. This is the situation where if there is a coup in South America or a major earthquake in Africa, the media is all over it, or maybe up to a week, until something else catches their interest. I always kind of liken it to that talking dog in the movie Up. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie, but he gets on a big spiel about something and all of a sudden, squirrel. You know, I feel like the media is sometimes the same way, very easily distracted. A great example I saw once when, I think it was 2009, I happened to be traveling through Italy one summer, and I was actually enjoying the fact that the news media over there seemed to have a more world-centric approach to what was going on, as opposed to, if you watch news programs in this country, they tend to be a little bit, how does this affect us in the US? Whereas the stories weren't as much like that over in Europe. Until one day, I got up one morning to get my morning dose of news before starting the day, and found out that while I was sleeping overnight, Michael Jackson had died. And that was interesting to me because, first of all, I learned something that didn't matter where you were in the world, that was now going to be the story that every news outlet covered for the next several weeks. It was particularly interesting to me because at that time, there had been a lot of coverage about student uprisings in Iran over the recent election, and it had erupted into violence. There was one particular incident where a video had been uploaded of this young female protester who got shot to death. And international momentum was really building. And I felt like after Michael Jackson died, I never heard about that story again. It moved the ball into a totally different direction, and that was really the last we saw of any kind of in-depth international coverage of that. So that's a problem. And also, if you look at what kind of job news media are doing in terms of informing you, there's some really interesting studies. This is one I pulled up from, that was done in the state of New Jersey back in 2012. And basically, they were asking current events questions to a random sampling of New Jersey residents to kind of find out how people got information, how well informed they were based on what they listed as their primary news source, where you get your news. So this is on domestic questions, how people score. They asked them 4 current events questions, and so this is the average score. As you can see, NPR had the highest score. They also did print, by the way, and the New York Times and I think USA Today scored actually pretty well too, pretty close to NPR's score. But this is just a look at some of the broadcast entities. Some interesting dynamics there. Take a look. Fox News viewers did worse than people who said they didn't watch news. Think about that. You were actually better off in this particular survey not watching any news in terms of your knowledge of world events. MSNBC did not fare much better. They barely beat out the no news crowd. Talk radio did a little better. Sunday shows did very well. Look what's placed in the middle of all these news shows, The Daily Show. A show that in many surveys among people in your age range, they've listed this as their #1 source of news and information, The Daily Show, which always shocks Jon Stewart because he will tell you, I'm a comedy show. Certainly we deal with current events, but I am not a news show. Yet, his viewers perform better on the domestic questions than talk radio, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. Pretty interesting. How did they do on international questions? Okay. Pretty similar situation. In fact, although The Daily Show does better. Daily Show's right behind NPR now. MSNBC has now joined Fox behind the group of people who said they don't watch news. So, what kind of conclusions? This is just one survey, but there have been several surveys in a similar vein that have come up with similar results. What does that tell us? For instance, 24-hour cable news. What kind of message are you getting from that? Yeah.
Well, you're actually getting dumber watching those shows, watching those
Yeah.
news networks, because you're more informed when you don't expose yourself to those outlets.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's shocking, because that's exactly the opposite of what media is supposed to be doing.
Exactly, yeah. That you can actually watch something and know less. That just seems counterintuitive to me. But that's what the surveys are showing. So clearly, the dynamics that we just talked about a minute ago that have changed the way people look at news and the way news is delivered have had some pretty poor results in terms of the end equation. But there's another issue out there as well, and I think most of you should be familiar with this. For instance, let's do another quick survey in terms of where you get your news and information. How many of you get your news and information from newspapers that as the primary source of your news information? Raise your hand if newspapers are your primary source. How many would consider television news of any kind your primary source of news and information? Okay. Now, how many would consider the internet your primary source of news and information? Yes. You are pointing to exactly where trends in news are going right now. And also, you're also showing us why network newscasts are in an absolute panic right now, because their audience is literally dying off. And there's nobody coming up to replace them. You are all moving to the internet, okay? So let's take a look here and see just how that shapes up, for instance, in a Pew Research Center study from 2013. Looking at social media as a pathway to news, they surveyed people as to what type of social media they use, and easily, to this day still, Facebook was the #1 place people went in social media in terms of usage. And then look at the smaller circle inside that. The smaller, darker circle is how many percentage of that percentage get news from that site. Okay, 30% of people who go to Facebook say they get news from Facebook. All right, they get news from Facebook. The news entities out there have been very aware of this trend. Here's an article I found just literally Monday. This was published on Monday. That Facebook may host news sites content. This is involving New York Times, BuzzFeed, National Geographic. They're in talks to have their content posted on Facebook because they see the writing on the wall and they see that you are all turning to social media for your news and information. So, if this is the case, with the internet and social media increasingly becoming the source, ignore that bad spelling there, for news and information, what are some inherent dangers? What do you see as some dangers? And I think some of you have probably fallen prey to this yourselves. What are some dangers? Yeah. You can get false news. Yeah, we're going to. Yeah, false information. Yes, we see this on a regular basis, don't we? Here's an example for you. Fake news accepted as real news. These were actual fake news stories that people were believing. Kim Jong-un named sexiest man alive. Seems kind of incredible, but people actually thought that was a real thing. During the last presidential election, Obama has my vote. He gave me a free phone. Lots of bogus information out there. I have a few friends, childhood friends on Facebook, who like to post links to these kind of stories and be outraged that this is going on. And I'm always kind of the buzzkill that goes on underneath and just writes, not real, fake story. I kind of, little self-volunteer role as a Facebook police sometimes with my friends on Facebook. But it happens a lot. And has it happened to you? Who's had that happen to you where you read something on Facebook and you thought it was true? I believe it's more than that. I've had that actually happen to me myself. But I learned early on to go, okay, where's this coming from? Oh, it says The Onion. Okay, probably not true. All right. Which led me a while back to put this cartoon on my door in my office. Now, son, do you know what you did wrong? Yes, sir. I shared something on Facebook without checking facts and encouraged bullshit to propagate, leading to the dumbing down of humanity. And that's a problem. That's a problem in the internet age. Think about particularly during election cycles. So many fake stories out there that people believe and to this day still believe. Even news organizations get taken in. This was a recent situation where, if you remember when they had the national parks closed down due to funding issues, one of the, I think it was a morning anchor on Fox News, was expressing outrage that while this is going on, President Obama is donating his own money to keep a Muslim museum open. Never happened. They were informed of this, so that she tweeted out her apology. Just met with my producers. I made a mistake yesterday after receiving flawed research about a museum possibly closing. My apologies. The actual story, the research she was referring to was a satirical piece from a satirical website. Yeah, that's pretty good research, isn't it? So, this has also led to another new development just as of January, that Facebook is starting to crack down on hoax news stories. They want to make sure that your news feed remains a little more truthful, so it's going to start trying to do more, although I haven't seen this happen yet personally. I'm not exactly sure when I will see the effects of this, but they are announcing an effort to alert users when stories that are seen in their feed are fake. which will allow them, the users, to start flagging hoaxes themselves. But Facebook says it won't remove false stories. The company says it won't start reviewing content and making determinations on accuracy. So this could be nothing more than just a public gesture that really leads to nothing. But clearly, they are aware of the problem. Okay. So this leads to one of the main points that I do want to make, which is there's been the fundamental shift in terms of how we define mass media, okay? This is the traditional definition up here of what mass media used to be, what it was defined as. And to kind of sum up, basically, mass communication is usually a one-way communication from a known sender, think of like a network, NBC, ABC, CBS, to a mass of anonymous receivers. In other words, you know who's giving you the information. They have no idea who you are. Now think about that definition in terms of the internet age. Why is that definition no longer valid? Anybody answer that question? The concept of an anonymous producer of information, not anonymous, a known producer of information sending to an anonymous audience. Why is that no longer an accurate or complete definition? Anybody know? Yeah.
Because the receivers are known.
Yeah. Receivers are known, and in more ways than one, not only because you can go online yourself and post things, but because there are all sorts of ways of tracking what you're doing online. For instance, we've all had this experience where you do a little bit of internet window shopping, and the next time you open up any page, all these pop-ups for exactly the things you've been looking at. It's amazing how well they can tag you for the kind of product you're interested in. Also, too, and this is really critical as well to remember, that it is no longer just networks and major media conglomerates who are media producers. Has anybody here ever posted anything on the internet? Raise your hand if you have. Everybody. Guess what? You are media practitioners. That makes you media practitioners because you are now part of the conversation. You're not just sitting here at home waiting for somebody to tell you what's going on in the world. You are contributing to the dialogue, sometimes in great ways, sometimes in not so great ways, but you're part of the conversation now. And this is important to think about because while I think all in all it's a great thing, it makes media more democratic, it also puts a lot more responsibility on you and how you use media. Think about it. How much time you spend online. This was another story that was in the New York Times a few years ago. It says, if your kids are awake, they're probably online. Lead sentence. The average young American now spends practically every waking minute, except for time in school, and I'm sure many of the faculty here would argue that even during time in school, using a smartphone, computer, television, or other electronic device. Okay? Think about that. How much time, I'd just love to know, how many hours do you think a week do you spend with some form of media? And, that's including your cell phones. Somebody shout me out how many hours a week you think you spend. Huh? Too many to count? Way too many to count. Yeah.
10.
Yeah. Okay, and how do we use that? What do we do with a lot of that time? Well, there's social media for socializing, right? We love our selfies. We definitely love to do that. We love to text. We love to look up information about celebrities. It's a fun tool, and it should be fun. I should say really quickly too. I know I'm running out of time, but I want to, as I'm talking about news and information and the importance of being informed. This is not me saying don't have any fun with media. I love good comedies. I love listening to music. I love doing fun things, with my cell phone. I'm just like you. It's just that it can't all be fun. And look what happens when it's not all fun. Okay? Who's familiar with Arab Spring? And what was the role of social media in Arab Spring? Yeah.
They organized a lot of their protests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Facebook played a huge role in the collapse of the government in Tunisia in terms of organizing, getting information out there instantaneously. Twitter played a huge role in the downfall of the Egyptian government. This is a company that I don't even know if they're making money now, but up to this point had never even turned a profit. And they played a huge role in a social revolution. So it certainly is important to people, very important to people. There was a clip I was going to play, but I see that I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to play it, but I can kind of recap what it was about. Who's familiar that there's a civil war going on in Syria? Yeah. Well, this started out just like these other social media revolutions. It started out as kind of peaceful demonstrations looking for rights and more power and more say-so in their government, but it's turned very bloody, very violent. And there's a documentary, I think it's called Return to Homes, and it's a city in Syria that they focused on, and using people who lived in Syria who were videotaping their experiences where people were regularly being picked off by government snipers, where their neighborhoods are being destroyed by aircraft fire, all these horrible things. Kids are dying in the streets. And these people are helping this documentary filmmaker get this video out to the world. And the clip I was going to play for you at the end of it, one of the women who's involved with this, I want to say she's like only 19 or 20, roughly your age. And she's constantly working to get this information out because she wants the world to see it. She wants all of you to see her footage. And the documentary person asked her, what's more important to you in terms of if you had choice between getting your footage out and you getting out yourself alive? What's more important? And she said her footage. She put more value on the video that she was producing and trying to get somebody in the international community to look at than she put on her own life. Kind of puts things in perspective when you think about it in that regard. So that leads me to just some final thoughts. Edward R. Murrow, one of my broadcasting heroes, and he was very much ahead of his time in terms of television news, tackled many controversial subjects, the Red Scare in the 1950s, migrant farm worker abuses, segregation. He was on the cutting edge of a lot of these stories. He gave a speech before the Radio and Television News Directors Association in 1958, and one of the key phrases he said was, this instrument can teach, it can illuminate, yes, even inspire, but it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's nothing but wires and lights in a box. Talking about television. Substitute television now and put in the internet. It's kind of the same situation, isn't it? But with one huge difference. Edward R. Murrow was talking to a room of his colleagues, and he was urging the networks to do things, to go out there. Why not, like, for a couple hours every month, do some documentary on an issue that's really important to the people? Why not do that? Is it really going to hurt your corporate profits to do this? So he was encouraging them to make a difference. So I would turn that question on you in the internet age and say, considering how many of you said you spend countless hours online, what if you just said, for 1 hour every week, I'm going to look up information on an issue of importance in this country, in this world, and learn a little bit more about it? Think if everybody did that, just 1 hour of your media time a week. It might change a lot. It would certainly give you a better base of information when you go to cast your votes for candidates and for issues. So just something to think about. At the round table, I hope some of you can come to that because I would love to hear your thoughts on how you use media. So I will see you at 4 o'clock for that. Thank you.
Okay, so some questions that some of you had was, one of them, news audiences are shrinking already, so how can we change topics without alienating the public and deliver the important stories?
That is an excellent question, and one that I do not know that I have an answer to. They're shrinking already. And this kind of alludes to the comment I made about one of my colleagues saying they are in such a survival mode now that when Miley Cyrus twerks, it's really hard to resist the temptation to put that in the news, because knowing, and all these journalists know, this is not what we want in here, but we've got to survive. And so they tend to make deals with the devil, so to speak, in terms of keeping the programs alive. But again, I'm going to flip that question and say, if they start doing those things, are we, collectively, are we willing to watch if they make a greater effort to be more substantial in their coverage of important events worldwide? Will we watch? And I don't want to give a cynical answer to that, but I want us to think about it and think about, are there changes that I can make in terms of my news patronage?
How would one go about demanding change and diversity in the global media?
I think you have a lot more power than you think you do. I know this from working in a news organization, because it wasn't often that you would get flooded with calls on a particular issue or a particular story, but it happened occasionally. And when it did, changes were made. Management responded to that kind of thing. I'll just use a quick example. During a 9/11 tragedy, most of you just probably have faint memories of that because you were very young, but for that first week after the buildings were hit, news organizations, local and national, like the footage you kept seeing over and over again was planes hitting the building, planes hitting the building. Suddenly, and this was totally grassroots, nobody organized this, but suddenly people said, I've had enough of this. They started calling up local stations, networks, sending emails, contacting them and saying, okay, I get it, the planes hit the building. I really don't want to keep seeing that footage over and over again. If you were watching news that every week, you noticed that within a day or two, every news organization, totally independently of each other, stopped showing that video because they got the message from the public. You really do have a lot of power. It's just a matter of expressing it. When you see something you don't like, send off an email. Communicate it any way you can. Go online if they have a page. A lot of them do now, and make comments there. People do read them. I know that for a fact.
Okay. Since our news stations focus more on demographics and ratings rather than content, do you believe that in the long run our generation will lack any understanding on major global issues?
It's something I worry about. I really do, and it's something I know my own kids get preached about constantly at home. I think it's a real danger. I try not to be a pessimist about life because I always like to see that there's hope on the horizon. That if enough of us raise our voices and raise these issues and have these kind of discussions, then we can turn things around. But it's a real hard period to read right now because, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, we are in a true media revolution, unparalleled since the invention of the printing press in terms of how information is disseminated. And that being the case, nobody really knows how this whole thing is going to turn out. What's going to be the end result down the road? Are we going to look back on this and say, okay, everything turned out okay, or is it going to lead to a less informed public and a more complacent public? I hope it's not the latter.
Do you think this younger generation has become more skeptical to news or more gullible than older generations?
I'd say more skeptical. Definitely more skeptical. I did a survey in one of my classes the other day talking about the code of ethics for professional journalists. And I wrote a bunch of terms on the board and asked if they thought this was addressed in the code of ethics. And one of the words I put up on the board was fair. I said, do they deal with fairness in the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics? And the majority of the class did not believe that was in there. That's some serious skepticism. Now, contrast that to when I was a little kid and there was a public opinion survey on public figures, and the person who was voted the most trusted individual in the United States of America was Walter Cronkite, the CBS TV news anchor. Try to imagine any news anchor in this country being voted the most trusted voice in America. It's pretty hard to imagine.
what do you think we can do, if anything, to help ourselves better our global understanding because of the way things turn out?
And this is kind of the end of my talk today. Really try to make a difference. And again, I'm not asking people to give up the fun stuff, not asking you to completely change the way you use media. Just saying, try an hour a week to look up some topic. I think this is one of the great things that we're doing in our classes now, is we're focusing on specific countries. And I've had students in my section say, you know, I knew that was a country, but that's about all I knew. I knew nothing that was going on. And so just that little bit is helpful. That we may not get a deep understanding of the countries we're studying, but we've gotten some understanding. If you spend an hour a week trying to get more understanding, you might find like you'll turn into a news nerd like me, and you might go for a lot more than an hour a week after you get involved with it. Okay, thanks again, everybody.